Kellen in the house. Kellen, how are you doing today?
What up, bro? Thank you for having me. How's everyone doing? Congrats, top 10. Those are awesome. I love watching this. Can you guys all see this? So today I'm going to be going through message market fit, resonance, and outbound in the AI era. So, section one, what's the problem? Outbound still works. Just kidding. Too many people misunderstand and think it doesn't, though. And so the tools have improved, right? We all undeniably like the tools are getting better, 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 but the results are not actually getting better on average. So we don't have a tooling problem, we have a meaning problem, right? And so here, this is a pyramid, right? At the bottom, data. Above data, as you add meaning, you get information. As you understand the application of that information, you have knowledge, and then knowledge in action as we're moving, right? That's wisdom. And experience brings us up this ladder, right? My belief is this cannot be engineered. This is something to be experienced and lived. So, why listen to me though? Founder of a business called the Deal Lab. I've been doing this outbound stuff a long time. We're partners with a bunch of all of everybody's favorites go-to-market brands. Our business has been around like almost coming up on 3 years this in a few months from now. So we've been doing this for a little bit. We actually were doing outbound services pre, clay era, as I call it, right? And so before the sort of like we can program AI to make our emails bang, right? Before Jordan Crawford made it easy for a bunch of us to rip amazing emails, right? We used to have to think about things similarly but achieve it differently. So that's what we're going to be going over a little bit, right? So I've spent my career in outbound sales. I was an SDR. I was 100% self-sourced AE, no inbounds, literally zero. I was head of a go-to-market inside of a company that did not have a product and was just like a concept when I joined it. Then did fractional VP of sales working for Joey Gilkey. He now owns TitanX, if you guys are familiar. Now I'm a founder of my business. So I've worked across pre-product companies, post-product. We've done scale, reset cycles, new market development, all sorts of different stuff, right? And the tools, they have changed across all of this, but the fundamentals have not. So, section three is going to be about words actually come before products. This is unintuitive. A lot of people, I don't think about things this way, but I think it's very powerful. So, people don't buy products out of nowhere, right? Like, it's not, the decision to purchase this like supplement right here. Like, I didn't not know about it and just randomly bought it, right? Because the product had market fit. Instead, conversations are entered first, right? And so this language is a little bit more for like B2B, but think of it as like we have to have the ideas about things before we make purchase decisions, right? Before you know the feature set of the product, you engage in some sort of, discussion. So conversations precede and they also vastly outnumber demand, right? For every 10 conversations you have with the market, you're not going to end up with 10 customers. And so if you're as a business, if you're thinking of it like some percentage of your 10 conversations are useful towards succeeding, you're missing out, right? Also, the way that words and ideas actually transfer between people is something people don't think about enough, right? And so I, as a speaker, have an idea, right? Inside of my head, there's these ideas that I want to transfer. I select words in order to, put formation to that idea. And then there's static, right? Think of literally misinterpretation of sound or focus, right? And so there's this static between the words I use and the words a recipient hears. And then off the words they actually physically hear, there's an idea that they derive, right? And so in B2B marketing, as an example, oftentimes what matters is the idea that a prospect walks away with, which is very different than the words that we selected to launch out into the world, no matter how right we are in our own head. And so product market fit happens after the conversation, but message market fit actually gets you that conversation to begin with. You also can literally change these words that you say to the market right now, right this second. Nothing is stopping you, right? Not your manager, not the company you work for, nothing, right? But we can't change the product this week, generally, right? Especially someone like me. I'm not a technical guy. I don't come from a technical world. I was just this like hired gun sales rep out in the world doing stuff. And so section four, why does message market fit exist, right? Most of the market isn't buying, right? So if you guys have seen this pyramid, Chet Holmes, shout out Chet Holmes, built this, right? 3% of the market is literally in a buying motion today. So if you send them an outbound message, you are being compared against whoever they have proposals in front of, right? 7% is open to buying, but not currently buying. These people have already thought about things, right? And sort of certain messaging strategies, you can kind of like snipe those conversations. But 90% of the market either isn't thinking about it, doesn't think they're interested, or knows they're not interested, right? And so being able to have messaging strategies that gets larger percentage of the market to actually be willing to talk to you is an advantage. If you're to take this and rotate it on its side 90 degrees, you would also have a timeline, right? Because these are cycles, right? Every company, the second they buy something, they know they're not interested. And as time goes on, they're going to stop thinking about it. Eventually, they're going to start to be open again, and then they're buying again, right? So every single company out there in your TAM is somewhere on this timeline, so to speak. And the messaging that would resonate and get them to be open to talk to you is different depending on where they are in these brackets. Yeah, I'll send you the slides. So future buyers don't know that you exist yet. Um, Only a small percentage of these people are in market. Marketing waits and farms that existing demand, right? So that 3 or that 10% at the top, right? You can, compete for paid ads to get those people. But Outbound to me teaches and hunts for openness to speak before the demand actually exists. In fact, it even lets you frame future demand, right? The demand that exists 3 months from now is going to be formed by the people using messaging strategies today. And transactional messaging strategies today just focus on why someone buy won't resonate with the people that aren't currently buyers, right? There's different stuff out there. So, section 5, cold start and inertia. 0 to 1 is the hardest phase, right? It's very difficult. This is Peter Thiel, if you guys don't know. Not because of the product, but because there's no shared language yet, right? We have this idea of something we're going to do. There's this idea of this market, but they're not actually paired together. And so message market fit either creates or discovers that shared language for us, right? Once the shared language exists, we start to have momentum, right? Everyone knows what it's like when you start to have messaging that's banging with the market and you're just like, man, this is easy, right? Shooting ducks. So inertia is power, right? Resonance versus personalization. So I believe in this kind of like hot take, and I don't want to be overly negative about this, but I think personalization is relatively fragile, right? If your messaging is created based on my little Supreme Christmas tree right there, that's not going to work for most people in this chat. And so that's going to work for just one person, right? If you think of this as a spectrum, left hand all the way out to the left is one to all messaging. So it's I say the same thing to every single person in the market. Right hand out over here is 1 to 1. I say a different thing to every single individual, right? And as you can think about it, 1 to 1 is inconvenient, right? Like it's not better to have to do 1 to 1 in order to resonate with your market. In an ideal world, you literally could say one to everyone and it's going to hit. Problem is, it's probably not going to, right? And so across the spectrum, a lot of times what we're doing is we're trying to kind of right size where along this are we aiming ourselves, right? How granular or broad are we defining our audiences? And then what can we actually say to them? And also words are finite, meaning like we can't just say infinity things to these people. So we're contained by like how much words fit into, an email or a page or whatever we're talking about. Right. So my belief, again, if it only works once, it's weak, leads weak. And so fragile systems basically require these perfect conditions, right? Like if we know this and if we have this data point and if, right? And it's like great and it's beautiful too. Like it's really cool. It's smart. Like I'm not, again, not a hater on this. I use personalization. I'm not against it. But it's just important to understand if the only reason this thing is working is because you can get, hard to get reach information. And if there are reasons and times that you're not going to be able to get that information, it's fragile. It's going to fall apart, right? Resonance, though, can work across multiple people, right? And so, everyone knows me best knows I'm a geek for this book, Anti-Fragile. This is a graph talking about the idea of improving under repetition and under stress, right? So the fragile under stress breaks. And so a lot of people think, how can we be, opposite of that? And so they might think robustness, as in resist change under stress, or even resilient, which is get better, but over time, those still eventually wane to failure. Whereas the anti-fragile improves, gains benefits from these stressors on the system. And so we want to be an anti-fragile system. So, section 7, how do we actually segment things, right? So, markets at a high level don't self-label themselves correctly, right? There's this flaw that's built into outbound and sales development and, B2B, all of the above, where it's like people are used to going to Apollo and they're like software companies, 11 to 50, like hiring signal, right? And they think that's their audience. But that's the pattern, right? And we need to break the pattern. If we play into the same pattern as everyone else, if we think of the audience as the same thing as everyone else reaching out to them, we're not going to have anything unique to say. Luckily, people subgroup themselves naturally, right? Like everyone on this call right now, you're not like the average outbound person, right? So someone said, not everyone here is outbound. We could say you're not the average GTM engine. Yeah, no one here is average, right? Like you're something specific again, you're a subgroup. Right. And so groups are cultural and linguistic, not demographic, right? Actually, something that I've been loving about this is it's funny, like how frequently we're like messing up people's names and whatnot. And I was thinking that's so cool that like we're from so many different places that the literal naming conventions that we all belong to feel super foreign, but there's definitely stuff that holds us together extremely tightly, right? And there's language that we could use around that. And so being able to speak to the specific nuanced preferences of your audience is high empathy, right? Like that is, it's very astute to be able to understand, as an example, reaching out to marketers. Are they product led, sales led, marketing led growth, right? Those people are going to use different metrics to measure their success. They need a different volume of events to happen, right? And if you speak to that on the front end of something with, of a conversation or in your messaging without making them sort of correct you, um, you'll stand out, right? So you can have the same product, right? The actual thing you sell someone can be the same, but the language is the thing that's actually different, right? People buy, think of like a water bottle. People buy water for a million different reasons. And in like Dasani wouldn't be smart to be sitting there like, no, 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 dude. This is why people buy water. It's like, no, there's tons of reasons, infinite reasons, right? And so using this sort of in-group language builds trust. The way I would think of it is identity beats information, right? Understanding so you can never land what you can do for someone before showing you understand what makes them unique versus everyone else that fits their pattern, right? So for me to say, like, trust me, I can build really good go-to-market systems for you uniquely. In order for me to be able to make that argument, that person doesn't actually need to judge my talent. They're judging, does Kellen understand what makes me different versus every other person that anyone who's built a go-to-market system has ever worked with, right? What makes them different, not what do you do different, right? Understanding that. So, Section 8, outbound as a truth system, right? The way I think about it, outbound isn't a channel, right? It's a testing system. And so every message, every campaign, it's like our hypothesis. And the responses that we get are data. So is silence, right? A lot of times people frame outbound as like we succeed when we're getting, high responses, high success, and we fail when we're not. The way I think of it is like the results we get tend to be the truth, right? And we're truth seeking. So invalidation of a concept is progress. That is moving the ball forward. Okay. When I used to do fractional VP of sales, VP of sales, I used to literally have customers that would be on like month 17 of having an SDR that they're paying, 85 grand a year or whatever. Plus they'd have a whole tech stack and they'd have like zero deliverability. They'd have like, 3 phone conversations a month, like almost nothing, but they wouldn't give up on it because they're like, I think this stuff should work. Right. And so being able to very quickly invalidate things and conclusively invalidate things is much, much, much more productive and valuable than I think a lot of people realize. And so there's inevitabilities, I think I said this earlier, between market segments and value props. And so mapping them out and testing them is how we work through what does work or not, right? So channels as testing surfaces, right? So not all channels themselves are interchangeable. They're not the same, right? They reveal different truths or they work by different mechanisms, is the way I would think of it. So calling, right, which is beautiful, love it. It's synchronous. It requires high skill. It's high variance, meaning each repetition is going to be God knows where, right? They're like live grappling, right? It's like man in the arena, go get it, right? So the strength is it's very immediate. The weakness is it's reliant on humans. You got to hire people to do it, right? You got to put people hours behind that. Some people are going to argue that's a strength, and there's an argument there. It's cool. LinkedIn, right? Like LinkedIn outbounds, right? It's social, visible, it's identity driven, right? There are like these subcultures within the channel itself. So strength is context and credibility, right? A lot of people on here probably have cool little profiles that, you come send me a message and I'll click on it and probably in 2 seconds, I'm going to know something about you, right? And we don't have that in email, right? The weakness is lower volume and it's profile dependent, meaning if you don't have that nice profile or if your audience doesn't care or doesn't, agree, you're not going to have that same strength, right? And so it's reliant on certain things. And then we have email, right? So asynchronous, relatively anonymous, and hyper repeatable. I love email because it doesn't require prior trust. You just show up and in like a 0 second uninvited moment, you either win or lose, credibility and willingness to engage further, right? And so repeatability creates clean learning through email, right? Being able to run campaigns over and over, same audience, it's very helpful. And so the most repeatable channel tends to produce the best signal because the data we get right is very clean. So craft over tools. Um, Something I state a lot talking like to my team and people I coach and whatnot is like the best home builder is not defined by the hammer, right? And that's the products we use, right? Tools do not create the outcomes, right? Craft does, craftsmen. And I believe that are craftspeople in our spaces, right? Not just conduits to the tools. And so understanding survives tool cycles, right? Your orientation to nuanced market perspective, 6 years ago, if you were doing that, you're probably still doing it today, and everything looks different, but here you are. And the reason is that difference in how you apply yourself, right? It's not the tools, it's not the access to the stuff, right? So Outbound is a truth machine. The best medical lab doesn't force results either, right? So if we're like a medical lab, think like we run clinical trials, you have 100 formulations. You're not like throwing away 97 of them and you're like, trust me, bro, like for the last research we did, like that other form of cancer, these three things work really, you got to test it all. And so it runs really, really clean tests and the truth is emergent, right? The truth just is, it will just happen. And so Outbound's the exact same thing. You don't bend reality to our beliefs. We don't go like, trust me, dude, I really aesthetically like running campaigns this way. Therefore, let me be, the round peg forcing myself into the square holes. Instead, as reality emerges, we have to adjust our own beliefs and our own understanding, right? We adapt to what we're seeing. And so in the AI era, AI helps us skill that labor, right? Like our perspective, how do we, be as involved as in as many things as is going on, right? That was stated poorly, but basically, like we can be touching more of the things. Back then, it used to be like Kellen with like 30 reps. I'd be like having all these check-ins and talking to people, blah blah blah. Now, like I can just like orchestrate these experiments, send them out into the ether, and in days get the data back, right? And so AI though isn't deciding the meaning, right? And I'd love you guys should host a debate next, and I want to like argue with all the AI bros. Um, but not that I think people make this argument too much, but I do think that like meaning is derived outside of this. The way I would think of it too is like GPT, it's like predictive, right? And so it's kind of like the average next output of the string of logic is sort of like what these LLMs are outputting, and which is the pattern. That is the pattern. They're predicting the pattern of the next thing. And if we're trying to create pattern interrupt, think of it like music. Like AI hasn't invalidated artists in music. Why? Because music is not just inclusion of the next most likely thing to be enjoyed, but it is taste, right? It's discretion. And so humans decide that meaning, right? And so to me, message market fit has become more important, more prevalent in the AI era of outbound, not less. So closing philosophy, and then we might even have a little bit of time for questions despite all these slides. So I think we shouldn't copy what works, honestly. Instead, we should ask why it worked. When something works, it's not like, how do I force that to work elsewhere? But it's like, what is the thing in this situation that was the unlock? One of the ways I state it is like people are single issue voters. So it's not like all of the 50 million GTM engineering stuff that we did in the background, like that isn't why it worked, right? This person in a snapshot had like a sentiment of a feeling off of an email or they listened to a voice note or whatever it is. And they were open and responsive to that. Um, and we want to understand, like what was that person feeling, right? If you ever think about like a bite of food that you took that you loved or a song that you've listened to and it just hit a certain way, right? You'll realize that like human experience is not so logical, right? It wasn't like you took the bite and you're like, oh man, like there's 13 grams protein, 7 grams of fat, 2-to-1 ratio. Like no. It's instantaneous, right? And so as we ask why did that work, and then we try to apply the pattern elsewhere, we again the truth will be emergent, and so I think we can own our own knowledge in the system as we apply it. We build our own data sets, our own perspective on the world. So I don't think we need better tools. We need better hypotheses. Outbound is how we discover, validate, and invalidate them, and that's how I got. Any questions? That was 100 slides in like 28 minutes or something. But
No, I really appreciate you for that for those slides. If you have any questions for Kellen, drop in the chat. I do got a few, but yeah, I mean, like, really just want to double down on that. Like, don't copy everyone else's playbook, right? Like, this is the whole idea about pattern interruption, right? You send the same email as everybody else, you're gonna get treated like everybody else, right? But yeah, so I guess I do have a couple questions for you. So the first thing is we got a small debate, back then. I think if Emil in this call, you know what we're talking about. But between, I guess, like, when it comes to code outbound, there's a lot of like stuff, right? There's like infrastructures, there's copy, there's targeting, there's leak list. Um, what would you say is something that people should put like the most emphasis on?
I think like I really just say like perspective. And the reason I say that and what it means to me is like so deliverability, email validation, a lot of things like that are multiple like accelerators or decelerators towards success, right? Meaning if you have, 50% deliverability in half you get, or in theory, you're going to get like half the results, right? And so you're not going to go from amazing to zero. Like that's not what, screwed up deliverability looks like necessarily, right? We can get into kind of like the hyper nuanced arguments about some of that stuff. But to me, again, it's why I say usually the results of campaigns are the truth. Usually the results we get are basically like the inevitability between this concept and this audience. And so I think as long as you're good enough on most of, to me when I run campaigns, I'm always just thinking like, is this data representative of the truth, right? Because the big risk is like, is my data set somehow screwed up in a way that's not representative? And that's where you can do things like split test the campaign, run it again, try new, there is all this other stuff. But I think a lot of people think of success as like a bajillion check boxes, and one of those check boxes is like segment the market, and one of them's like creative copy or whatever. When again, really, it's like this person's going to get a message. They're going to like in 1 second basically judge, is this worth me like diving into a little bit further? And if yes, they're going to like briefly read it. And you have that long to make an impression for that person to go like, damn, this guy knows me enough that I'm willing to go spend some time with them. And so I think like perspective and nuance is underrated and something that people focus not enough on.
Yeah, thank you for that perspective, and I think I agree with that too. Right? It's like no, depending on the case. Like sometimes the lead list is more important, sometimes the copy is more important. Um, and yeah, I think Kellen also just dropped the gamma slide in the chat as well. But yeah, if you sign up for the event, we're gonna send you guys one last newsletter. So keep an eye out on. We'll send like all the sessions and all the recording and all the asset for you guys too. Um, any other last minute for Kellen? Kevin, what do you see 2026 going into in terms of AI tools and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I think like I mean, I sincerely my expectation. So there's this thing called the Lindy concept, right? That my friend Paul Scalise writes about a lot.
Mm,
Comes out of Nassim Taleb's Anti-Fragile. But the idea of it is like it's a mathematical probability on the future existence of something predicated on its historical existence, right? Meaning the longer something has existed through time, the more likely it is to continue to exist. Think coffee, right? Like coffee's been here for thousands of years. Like it's probably going to be here 10,000 years from
yeah.
now. Whereas like blue energy drinks are pretty new. And even though I love those things, they're probably not going to be here thousand years from now, right? And so to me, I think of it as like, what is the relationship that the individual has? Again, and I think it's like perspective. And I think like the Lindy, go to market thing is going to be like unique perspective, like creativity on creation of things, and then like working hard and organization and all that type of stuff.
Yeah.
And I just think like the scale and the speed and everything like that is just going to get so crazy high that if you are not able to like extremely quickly be like commanding decision making in that environment, it's going to be hard to be as an individual hyper potently valuable. And so to me, it's like the same stuff, just more and faster and with like a lower, like it'll be less and less acceptable to be like half-assing it basically.
Mm. I like that. I like that. We do got a couple more questions on the chat, so let me just run it down. So the first question is, how often do you test? I think it's a great question. How often do you test? And I guess I can expand to that is when should you stop testing?
Yeah. Super good question. So, like anti-fragile, right? Like the idea is barbell theory, right? And so on one, so the, okay, I'm gonna try to hit this well. So people who have high asymmetrical results, right? Meaning like they don't come from like higher effort inputs usually. And so the most likely way of getting an asymmetrical outcome is a low probability asymmetrical outcome event, meaning it like winning the lotto, so to speak. And so the volume of low probability, high asymmetrical bets that you can place, meaning the numerical count of them, is how you maximize your likelihood of hitting one. So, like if you launch 20 campaigns a month versus two, you're 10 times more likely to have one of them be the one that hits. Right. And so barbell theory is like this concept of like allocating max amount to this low probability side of the barbell, but on the other side, balancing it with avoid catastrophic failure, basically, or like avoid death. And so the idea would be like, because the largest risk to placing more incremental bets is like getting fired or whatever. Right. And so you have to like balance this. Um, Always be testing. Like literally never, I believe never not be testing it in it the relative like the relativity of what you're testing, I guess, changes. And so day one, it might be kind of more broad strokes, like different markets and segments and personas. And over time, that should kind of cinch up. But again, the more it cinches up, I would be more and more willing to test outside of your like averages because the things that work today will over time wane. And the net new testing is where you reinvent the next new thing. And you learn a lot through randomness. And so just having like high volume, high velocity, we tend to think of it as like 2 week ship cycles. If you think of like product development life cycle, kind of like sprint architecture, if you do, let's say 2 to 4 step email, like let's say you do a 3 step email, then and it's one email every other day, then if you launch cohort A on the first of the month, like no one is going to be done with that sequence that first week even. So it takes at least a week plus some change to have some bit of the cohort go through all 3 steps of the emails. And so I find that doing like bi-weekly cycles is a really clean way of like defining audiences, building shipping things, getting data, and then interpreting it to reship. So you have like this hyper regular cadence to things. Hopefully that hit it.
Awesome. I like that. I like that. Um, I think on that topic of testing as well, just follow-up question from Sandra. What do you weight more when you test? The subject line, CTA, all kind of stuff?
Yeah. So again, like I think it's really, really, really important. So there's two concepts, right? There's what we as the builders control, and there's like 100 factors. That isn't what makes a result happen. What makes a result happen is the interpretation by the recipient, right? And so the thing I would ask is I'd be like, Sandra, do you think that recipients feel the subject line the most, the CTA the most, the this the most? And I'd basically test against the things that you believe is going to most meaningfully change your perspective and understanding of what you're trying to learn. Because it also just like depends. But generally, it's not like I have 5 campaigns and they're all the same, just like with different subject lines. Usually it's going to be a little bit. So we kind of go like market, segment, persona, angle is like the phrasing I would use for how we, build out campaigns. And so a campaign would be like a certain angle or idea to a certain persona within a certain specific segment of a certain market. And we may be testing like this angle or idea to this persona, and we might have like 5 different angles to the same persona in the same segment, the same market. It might be same angle, same persona, different segments of different markets. It might be same angle, different personas. So it can kind of be like all over. And there's also this concept of like what a customer wants versus my thoughts, right? Because I'm usually also kind of triaging. Like if if you're paying me 50 grand to do this, like you probably have some opinions of what that should look like. And if I have really, really different opinions, it's really high risk for me to like ignore what you want and just do what I want. But it's also really high risk for me to ignore my intuition and my experience and just do yours. And so I think again, it usually we start with like map out as much variance and breadth on the front end as possible. And then we have a scarcity of what we can actually run. And that becomes sort of like the value that we're delivering is helping work through these tests and these ideas that this customer wants to test with the market.